Okay, but anyway, to start off today, we're going to have a little study session. We're going to go over some annual board training that...
Microphone.
Hold that up there. We're going to go over our annual board training that we're going to do every year at annual business meeting time. It's just to kind of a little refresher course on serving on a board for the city of Salina, and also a little bit about how the organization works and things like that. Moving along there, the agenda for this one, you can read on there. Have a welcome, so welcome all of you here today to the study session. I'm going to do organizational review, and then conduct and expectations while you're at a serving on a board, and then what do you want to get from this experience, and then we'll end up with a question and answer period. Why local government? Serving on boards and commissions is a pretty valuable thing to do for your community. You all serve on, you all work within the building community in some manner or fashion, or at least had at some point. And so it's great to have representation from our local community in regards to, especially when we get moving forward to adopting codes and things like that. But serving on this board is a pretty important thing, and first of all, we really appreciate you guys doing this, and I hope you guys get valuable service out of it too. I'm not going to read each and every slide. I'm going to kind of summarize a little bit, but as you can see on there, there's pretty good check marks on there on things why it's important. Moving on to departments in the city of Salina. You can see a list of them there. We're going to go over each one of them briefly, just to give you guys a little bit of an overview on what each one does. We'll start city manager's office. They're our leaders. Mike Scragg is our city manager. Jacob Woods, our deputy city manager. The way our department works with them a lot is we'll deal with them on mowing appeals, things like that. You guys, we've had those before. Just about had one here recently. People will want appeal in the city code about how to, if they don't think that their property needs mowed right away, things like that. They'll do that for us. The city manager's office, in a bigger picture, also manages city commission. So anytime we have blue sheets or reports that need to go to the commission, city manager's office will run it through them, and they'll run that for us. 6 full-time staff over there. Moving on to arts and humanities. Brad Anderson's the director over there. They're located across the street at the Smoky Hill Museum. What they're in charge of basically is the quality of life and events that happen in the city of Salina. Of course, if you have kids that play sports and things like that, you've had firsthand experience on what they do. But there's also larger events like the River Festival, things like that happen around town. But also, if you're building new houses or running businesses or things like that, people move into town. It's pretty big deal when they want to move to Salina. They want a good quality of life, and that's what this department is in charge of. Computer technology, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Rita Stevenson's our interim director. They're located just down the hall here, and they handle all the computer needs of the city department and staff. Finance department, located upstairs. Debbie Pack is the director of finance department. Of course, finance department, that's fairly self-explanatory as well. They handle all the financial needs of the city, controlling all the money and things like that. Also located over there under the finance department is the city clerk. A lot of you if you involved in licensing, contractor licensing, things like that, they're the ones that take all the applications and that sort of thing for that sort of thing. Fire department. course, as you're all aware, the city has a fire department. Kevin Royce is the fire chief over there. Troy Long is the fire marshal. We deal with them quite a lot as far as Troy and his 2 fire inspectors. They'll go out, do inspections, and ensure that the International Fire Code is properly enforced. They also obviously do plan review and things like that for projects that we have. But Troy Long is the fire marshal over there, and that's who deal with for the most part as far as building things go. Human resources. You all work for companies, and a lot of you have a human resources department. You kind of know what they do. They're responsible for all the city employees, administering benefits, hiring, recruitment, payroll, all that sort of thing. But they oversee 475 full-time employees, so as you can guess, pretty busy over there. Natalie Fisher is their director, and they have 4 full-time staff. Municipal court. Presided over by a municipal judge. Our city prosecutor is Christina Trocek. Our department uses them as far as a lot of times for property maintenance code stuff. Also sometimes building code stuff if we send violation notices, but it's not really something that the city can abate. We'll send over to municipal court, and they can get the job done. We've had a couple of times contractors working without license, things like that. We send them over there for violations of that sort of thing. And they also help us get administrative search warrants if we have to do backyard inspections or things like that at people's houses, whatnot, things like that. But that's municipal court. Parks and Recreation. Chris Cotton is the director over there. 10 divisions, 52 full-time, 4 part-time staff. The part-time staff is a little bit subjected to this COVID thing right now, but I think most all of them are back on service. If you've, like I say, if you've dealt with, I'm sure most of you have touched Parks and Recreation in one way or another. If you lived in Salina for very long at all, they also control the animal shelter, and they're also in charge of quite a little bit of mowing around town with all the parks and things like that. They don't do the city right-of-way stuff, but they work in conjunction with Public Works to get all that stuff done. Police Department. Most of you are aware of what police department, what they do over there. Brad Nelson is chief of police, 111 full-time staff. How they affect our department, we work with them fairly closely. They have 3 of us inspectors on a call list, so if a car hits a house in the middle of the night, they can give us a call. We can go out and do a rundown of assess the building safety and things like that. They also assist us with drug houses, things like that. If we have to get in and we request police escort, sometimes even if we're towing in-off vehicles out of people's yards, they'll come over and just kind of stand by to help us out. For the most part, building services can do our job without a police escort, but every once in a while it gets a little sticky, and we're grateful that they're there to help us. Public Works. Right now, the director is vacant right now. That just retired recently, so Public Works, the director is vacant. They have 85 full-time staff, 2 part-time staff. Also under that department is engineering and general services. Engineering we work with, our department works with pretty regularly on as far as plan review, things like that. They'll look at things like flood control, sidewalks, driveways, that sort of thing, curb and gutter, all that business. General services also takes care of maintains all those things, including the landfill, traffic control, and things like that. And also, as I mentioned earlier, they do or subcontract out a lot of the city right-of-way mowing that's not adjacent to other properties, like your medians and whatnot, things like that. Utilities. It's composed of water, wastewater, and water distribution. Martha Tasker is our director over there. A lot of you, especially if you're involved in the plumbing trade at all, have spoken with Martha on the phone. You can, if you want to, locate sewer taps, water taps, get any sort of services like that. Also, or if you're a citizen of Salina, you know where the water customer accounting office is, right down the hall here, where you might pay your water bill. but they have 57 full-time staff. Moves us on to Community and Development Services, which is my department here. Consists of 3 divisions: Planning and Zoning, Building and Neighborhood Services, and Community Relations. Planning and Zoning is ran by our Planning and Zoning Administrator, Dean Andrew, and he does a lot of our plan review in addition to all his other jobs, looking at planning and zoning issues for those things. Building and Neighborhood Services, you're all aware of what we do. We're the most favorite division in the city, I think. The enforcement of adopted building codes and property maintenance codes, things like that. Community Relations, there are civil rights enforcement of the city in regards to employment, public accommodations, and housing, and landlord-tenant rights. And they're a pretty busy group down here too. They're located around the first floor, right down the hall here too. Oh, sorry, I should mention that Lauren Driscoll is the director of our of our department. CDS boards and commissions. That's Community and Development Services. We're in charge of quite a number of boards and commissions there, as you can see, and as you can see also that keeps us all pretty busy. In addition to all the other things that we have to do. There's a Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, Heritage Commission, Design Review Board, Human Relations Commission, Accessory Advisory Board, Accessibility Advisory Board, and then Building Advisory Board. These are all things that we work pretty hard at to keep things moving along. Whenever we do meet, it's quite a little bit of work putting together packets and things like that. So, but it's quite a workload for the staff, but it's a pretty valuable thing that we do, I think. A lot of these boards and commissions boards will act as advisory to the City Commission, which meets every Monday. There's many, especially on the planning side, there's many different things that if you have a Board of Zoning Appeals thing, an item could also have to be heard by the Planning Commission and then on to the City Commission. So a lot of these kind of work together on getting problems and issues staffed and ran through the system. Okay, move on to meeting must-knows. I'm sorry. I think Lauren wanted to talk about these couple slides here.
Well, I know we're kind of throwing a lot of information at you guys. Lauren Driscoll, Director of Community and Development Services. Some of you may have sat through a lot of this information before and a couple of these other slides, and you may have received or should have received packets with some information we're going to talk about after this meeting. And this is part of this kind of annual meeting process, both coming from the City Manager's Office and from the department. It's been an interesting few months with COVID. We went down to almost about 2/3 of our staff only working 2 to 3 days a week. So we just started having everybody back in the office about 2 weeks ago, and all of our boards and commissions have been rescheduled to a significantly less number of meetings this year. So we're playing a little bit of catch up. Not to mention, we have 7 vacancies thanks to retirements that should have happened in a normal cycle, but thanks to COVID, happened during a pandemic. So you get myself and you get Allison, who are kind of new to being here at your meetings regularly. I usually do see you guys sometimes for training and things like that, but Sean has been holding down the fort the last few months, and we wanted to take this opportunity to keep you guys on schedule, but also make sure you got this critical training. So over the next couple of months, things will normalize out a little bit, especially as we start to fill positions and we get back to our regular meeting schedule. You're also one of our few boards that didn't have a ton of vacancies that are filled, so many of you guys have been at this a while, but each board and commission that we have in our department, and all boards and commissions in the city, got the same paperwork you guys did, got that same sheet to look over and those materials, and then all of our boards and commissions and many others in the city are having presentations just like this, primarily so you guys realize you're kind of one piece in very many cogs, and sometimes it feels like how this stuff relates to everything else feels disconnected. And so the hope in some of this is to try and help you guys disconnect or to connect to those things. And then also just be able to have at your fingertips the best materials to do what you do. So these last couple of slides talk about, as a board member, things that either you're aware of or good reminders, and some of those things that as staff asks questions, particularly to chairs or vice chairs, if you're filling in, we may be asking you questions like, do you think you need to hold a special meeting for that? Well, let's talk about maybe some of these technicalities and how these meetings run. So right now we're actually kind of doing double duty. You have a regularly scheduled meeting for today, and that's, when we say regular meeting, those are the things that happen on that schedule. It's established through the clerk's office every other month, every month, quarterly, whatever your board is, at its regular time. You as a board can call a special meeting that is something above and beyond your regular schedule. So this most often happens with this board when we get into adopting new building code, that it's just not enough for the regularity in which you guys meet. We may need to call additional special meetings. Those have to be advertised the same way as a regular meeting. All the components that go into a regular meeting occur with a special meeting, and you can take action in a special meeting. Study sessions are typically called before or after a regular meeting, and they're not action oriented. They're just an opportunity. They're still advertised, they're still made available, but the board does not need to take an action at that time. It's usually a learning opportunity or more of a back and forth conversation, but those don't result in an action being taken. And then annual meetings happen in the fall, typically after August, when the mayor does a large amount of appointments to all boards and commissions in the city to make sure a new chair and vice chair are appointed. Some other boards and commissions have other actions that they need to take. When you get your packet, typically what you're going to be looking for, most of you know your agendas, your minutes. I just want to remind everybody about ordinances and resolutions. Typically, the BAB and its role cannot adopt an ordinance outright. That power usually lies with the city commission. You're usually reviewing an ordinance and making that recommendation to the city commission to adopt that. So if you see ordinances in your packet, that's the objective there. Resolutions both can be done at the city commission level and at the BAB level. When a resolution is in front of you guys, it's the most formalized way in which you communicate something to the outside world. Either you're communicating it to the city commission, or you're communicating it to staff to enact for you or to follow through on. You're communicating that to the general public. Minutes are great and they're a good record, but there's nothing that really quite supplements for a resolution and the formality of that, because it not only says what you wanted to have happen, but also why that happened. So often you'll see resolutions in your packet, and that's where staff's connecting something you've asked to have happen with something you want to communicate to the city commission through that, and those need to be voted on. Public notice, maps, those things will often end up in your packet. Public notice is a concern as a board member, just trying to be aware of who is informed about the actions that you are acting on ahead of time. Did all parties that need to know about this become aware of it? Were there extra additional steps for public notice taken? Meeting actions and parliamentary procedure. We won't go too deep into this. I think one of the easiest things to remember is you don't need to be a parliamentarian or a Parli Pro expert, but in general, we use parliamentary procedure as kind of a way to create some general decorum. You know, motions are putting something on the table for an action. A call to question can be a way, if the discussion seems to be going on, and as a board member you feel it's time to really act, then you can call to question, and that really brings everything back to that action that needs to be taken. There are times when you may act on something as a board, and at the next meeting you want to reconsider. You think maybe that wasn't the best decision for the board. Additional information's come forward, or you've thought about this, or there's a variety of reasons you may want to reconsider. But that is something a board can do. Somebody can withdraw a motion. So if you made a motion, discussion happens, and you think, I don't really feel that way anymore. I don't want to make that motion. You just can simply withdraw that motion. Your actions, when we talk about things like motions, withdrawing, reconsidering, need to be directed through the chair. Mr. Chair, I withdraw. And then the chair acknowledges that and keeps that meeting paced and orderly. You'll often hear staff talk about quorum. Usually chair and vice chair keep an eye on that too. If we don't have enough people to meet the minimum in order to make a decision as a board, you actually can't act. So if you show up and only 3 of you were here, we're not meeting quorum. The only thing that could take place in the meeting is to simply reschedule or acknowledge when the next meeting was going to be. No business can be conducted. So that's something we're often keeping an eye on. It's not quite as big of an issue with a larger board like this. And then there are times that you may have to conduct a public hearing. Public hearings are slightly different than just taking public comment. They're often legally required. And part of that process is actually formally opening a public hearing, taking those comments, and formally closing that public hearing, because it is a very distinct style and a very distinct purpose to those comments. So as a board member, as you start to look at your agenda and how those meetings are operated, or if you're interested in being chair or vice chair, those are things to keep in mind. Codes, plans, and studies are just something to keep in mind. This slide here really highlights all the codes pertinent to what you guys are doing are available online. I'm a huge fan of MuniCode, which is our online provider. I've used several others. It's very good. So from there, looking at any of the city's municipal code, you can actually cut and paste right from there into a Word format. You can share links. So it's very easy to search things through there. In addition, we have the links to all of the other codes being used. You can also get, of course, to planning and zoning codes. And then community relations uses these code sections. They don't enforce Landlord-Tenant Act, but they are knowledgeable about it and share that information.
Just wanted to interject that on that Muni Code thing, Chapter 8 is where you'd find all your local building code amendments and things like that. So if you're ever curious, can't remember, whatever, the local code amendments are in Chapter 8 in that code, and it's very easy to save, print, whatever you want to do there. You can, pretty helpful.
And one of the other reasons I highlight codes, plans, studies is when we bring something forward to you, those are the types of things that staff is analyzing and including in your staff reports. Are there adopted plans or recognized national studies that pertain to the topic that you're dealing with? Those things are the things that are outlined in your staff report or attachments that are included. Are there relevant codes in which we're making a recommendation from? And then studies, of course, either we've done or other entities have done. So those are the types of things typically used in that decision-making process. So I know we talked a little bit about this last year, and just a reminder, and it does have to do with that packet that the city clerk's office has had sent out. Do remember that Resolution 17-7463 is the city's ethics policy, which you should have received a copy of. I don't think there's a great need to go into a lot of detail. This can get a little complicated sometimes if you are owning property, things like that you may have to be making a decision on, how maybe some rules or regulations affect something you have an interest in or an ownership in. I always suggest if you have questions related to ethics, you're looking at the agenda, and that's one of the reasons looking your packet ahead of time is important. If you're looking at the agenda and you see that there's something on there, some type of advisory case or new code that you may have some type of, I'm not even going to try and guess at this moment, but some type of financial, maybe could be even perceived as an unethical relationship to something, feel free to call ahead. If we don't know the answer, our city's legal counsel acts as an advisor on that to be able to have that discussion. It happens quite a lot in the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission. It is, I will tell you, much easier to deal with when you call ahead. We can have that discussion, and it lets legal have that discussion or do some research if necessary, rather than trying to have that discussion kind of live in a meeting. So those are just things to think about if you do have ethics questions. And it's always easy to say, oh, it will never happen, but you wouldn't believe sometimes how it can happen, or it seems like it could happen. So it's always best just to have that discussion ahead of time. We've also talked about COMA, which is Kansas Open Meetings Act. So everything that we see here, the advertising of the meeting, the planned location and time, the availability of meeting or meeting materials is all part of the Open Meetings Act and the transparency that goes into that public process, which you guys are a part of. Probably the one that I think is probably most relevant and sometimes easily forgotten is ex parte communication, particularly when you guys are doing quasi-judicial matters. So quasi-judicial is when you guys are making a decision, you're kind of acting like judge and jury, where legislative matters, particularly like code-related things, where you're recommending a new code, building code, that is a legislative issue. When you're dealing with quasi-judicial matters, you should not be having conversations outside of this room with other people, even other board members. The idea is when you're in this room, the materials you have presented in front of you and the testimony or public comment that you're getting, that is what you're making your decision from, and the interaction you're having with the other commission members when you're at the meeting. In a quasi-judicial matter, if you're having conversations amongst each other, we start getting into serial meetings, micro meetings, ex parte communication. If somebody who is, in favor or against that quasi-judicial issue is kind of lobbying you, hey, glad we all shop at Dillon's, I'll talk to you later. You need to engage in that conversation. You don't need to respond to those emails. And if you do feel like something like that's happening, give Sean a call and we can kind of identify, is this or is this not ex parte communication? I think the simplest litmus test is if you are in a decision-making role and the BAB is the end-all be-all in that decision, outside of the meeting you should not be discussing that. If you come across something that you want the rest of the board members to know, we can make that available in the meeting. A lot of times we'll get a question from a board member during a quasi-judicial matter. Staff can respond to that ahead of time and then provide all that answer to everybody on the board. The idea is that all board members need to have the same equal information in your decision making. Make sense? Okay. Conflict of interest is really outlined well in the ethics policy. And you guys have been great about that when certain things have been being worked on, code amendments and things like that, and kind of making your conflicts known. They don't always result in something, but sometimes just making those known and having that discussed and seeing if the board wants to do anything about it is just half of that battle. Last thing on ex parte communication, it also kind of feeds into serial meetings. When we email you guys something, like your packets for instance, do not do a reply all. Repeat after me, do not do a reply all, because once you do that and each of you start replying in your own ways and reply all, you are essentially conducting a meeting because you are all part of it and you are all having conversation and doing things that result in or could result in a suggested action. So we don't want those happening by email. If you get your packet and you've got a question, just respond back to either the staff person that sent it or Sean, and then we can kind of work through the best way to communicate that to everybody, whether it needs to be done ahead of the meeting or after the meeting. And one of the reasons I think it's kind of pertinent to understand these things is you guys could put a lot of time and energy into getting results, to getting a new piece of code or dealing with a difficult quasi-judicial matter. And if we don't pay attention to these types of things, it can actually kind of all go out the window, whether we have to start the whole process over again or it gets dragged into court. And that's some of these procedural things. Keeping an eye on those ensures that the work that you guys do is good work and gets used the way that you intended it to get used. I think you guys are fairly familiar with the roles. I think one of the most important ones is just understanding the chair and vice chair's role, how they operate in the meeting. The chair is really that key facilitator, making sure that the meeting remains orderly, it remains on track, that relationship with staff, that the board and commission is getting what it needs. The chair often serves as kind of a point of reference if a decision needs to be made prior to a meeting, like calling a special meeting. The chair is usually the person who does that. Vice chair serving in that same role, but as a backup when the chair is unavailable. Applicant, public, staff, I think those are pretty self-explanatory. And just overall, there are expectations that you guys have for us, And I think as we kind of get everybody back in the office and get our point together, it's equally important that being here, if you're not going to be at the meeting, please let us know ahead of time. That does become quite an issue when dealing with quorum. And if you have question about materials or can't be here and then an issue maybe needs to be postponed or something, if you're chair, that's kind of a big deal, knowing you're not here, making sure we have the vice chair here to handle the rest of the meeting. I will always recommend this. You should read your packet. I know it's a kind of an assumed thing, but not everybody does. Even just glancing through it, if you've got, just we all have life going on, even just glancing through it, making sure you're familiar with the agenda and being aware of what we're going to be dealing with. There should be no phone call or texting at the dais, and I think that's not only for dealing with quasi-judicial issues, but when we have people in the audience who are here testifying, speaking to you as a board and commission, they want your full undivided attention. It's always good to ask questions. If we need to get more information, stuff needs to be made more clear, different graphics, different materials, definitely ask for those things. Be independent and be informed. That kind of comes back to some of those quasi-judicial things is, understanding the material. If you don't, you need greater clarification. That's part of staff's job, is to get you the materials you need to make really great decisions. Okay, Sean.
All right. The slide, what do you want to get out of this experience? We kind of covered at the very beginning here how important, we think you guys are. Is there anything that you guys you care to add to that, or, why are you here, basically? I mean, there's reasons we went down why we think you're important. Is there anything else you guys want to add or anything you want to bring forward that might be helpful? No. Well, I would like to reiterate, though, we do value this, and it's been since February, I believe, we met last. Going through this whole pandemic thing and everything else, it's been definitely an odd time, but it's very much appreciated that you guys take your time out of your day. You're all have jobs of your own, lives of your own, and we really appreciate you guys, working hard to get here and make this community a better place. Was there any questions or anything that we went over so far?
I noticed on the BAB you had our schedule as quarterly. Was that right?
Yes. Well,
we meet monthly.
Well,
right.
It was monthly. We decided to switch it to quarterly since there's been hasn't been a whole lot to be on the agenda lately. I mean, we can always change that, but right now we just moved it to quarterly so that we wouldn't have to send out cancellations and keep you guys on your toes every week about whether or not we're going to have it or not. So we decided to just move it to quarterly so that we'll definitely have it every quarter. We'll meet up and discuss any issues we might have. If it needs to be moved back to monthly, then we can definitely do that if things arise to make that necessary.
So has everybody turned in their receipt of volunteer board documents? If you haven't, Sean has copies here for you to sign.
Yeah, I think everyone who didn't get one back via email, I gave you one today. I got a couple left here for people that weren't here yet, but
and within that,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, just within that packet, that's a copy of the resolution that we discussed. That's the city's ethics policy. There's also a copy of Resolution 1774-69, which is the volunteer boards and commissions policy. It's kind of just general overall rules of like attendance, when meetings occur, things like that. It's just kind of an overall operations for boards and commissions, and as somebody who's part of that. And then the final one is a Citizen's Guide to Open Government, and that document actually comes from the State Attorney General's office. So all three of those should have been in that packet that you received, and if at any time you have questions about those, please feel free to ask staff either now or at any time in the future.
All right. unless there was anything else that you guys had questions about or anything like that, I think the study session here is, we can finish that up and we can move on to the regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay, to call the Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 Building Advisory Board meeting to order. Roll call, and I think all of you are familiar with this. We'll start on the right end.
Ryan White.
Mike McCall.
Kevin Cool.
David Miller.
William McBride. Scott Kraus. Greg Nichols. Dwayne Grace.
Okay, item 1.2. Chair requests staff confirmation that Kansas Open Meetings Act's required notice has been properly provided.
It has.
Okay, next item, approval of the minutes of the February 11th, 2020 meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion. I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, call for the question, signify by saying aye, signify by saying aye for approval of the minutes.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. New business.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to enlarge that a little bit more? I brought it up to 125. You want me to do it 150 so it's easier to read?
Yeah, I'm kind of needing that. Okay, new business. Public hearing items.
None.
Must be.
There are none.
Quasi-judicial matters.
None.
Legislative matters.
None.
Administrative items. Discussion of board bylaws. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Staff had been looking at this quite a while back, actually, probably before the last February's meeting, and the board bylaws hadn't been looked at in quite some time. They were adopted by the board in December of 2000, and so we thought they kind of needed updated and refreshed a little bit. Before it was just a little one-page item here. And we have them up there on the board. You might need to make that a little bit bigger if you
Right.
can. It was adopted by Mike Morgan, so you can tell that's been quite a little while ago. But the bylaws go down. They talk about a description of the board, what the purpose of the board is, number of officers, chair and vice chair. What we've tried to do, we've created a draft version of a new and updated bylaws. We've incorporated all the stuff that was in the original bylaws. We've just kind of added and clarified a little bit about a few of the topics because in here in your original board bylaws were pretty vague about that, honestly. The starting on the where it says purpose there, that are powers and duties. It's just the purpose of the board. That's kind of word for word on what it said on the original there. I'm sorry, I should have clarified this a little bit before we started here, but this is just a draft version that staff has come up with here to update your minutes. It's not something you guys need or we need you to vote on today. We just kind of wanted to go over this. It is in your packet that we emailed you out So if you'd like to read over this a little bit more when you get home, or if you've already read it before you got here, that's awesome. But we kind of just wanted to go over this today. It is a draft. We're not adopting it today or anything like that. If we adopt new boards and bylaws, that is some bylaws for your boards, that is something you guys can vote on and do. But we have to get it totally vetted throughout our system of hierarchy here. But we just kind of wanted to have you guys go over it today to kind of see what we were up to and how we're updating your boards and rules. But anyway, the Article 2, purpose of your board, listen to appeals, listen to update codes, advise the city commission. And then specifically, the board shall study all uniform codes, make recommendations to the board and city commissioners, act in an advisory capacity to the board and city commissioners on any requests of ordinance change or building codes, serve as a board of appeals. That's something that we've also redone, how you guys listen to appeals to code and there's two different appeals. One is building code and the other is city property maintenance code. And we kind of went over that, I think, at the February meeting, actually, on how those processes would go. Recommended rules and regulations adopted by the resolution of the Board of City Commissioners regarding registration and contractor licensing. So you guys, that's your board shall specifically do all those things, A through E. Membership of the board. I remember the original bylaws did actually spell out what trade or whatever is going to be in each position. This one, I think we need to get that added back in there. That's just something I noticed while I was sitting here. We didn't have the licensed architect, licensed journeyman, or mechanical plumber, so on and so forth.
I think the reason is because the ordinance is actually what creates the composition for your board, and rather than listing them all in the bylaws.
That's why we just put the number there. Okay.
If staff goes and changes the ordinance, or you guys want the ordinance changed, it's much easier to change it in one spot rather than to do a massive listing like that. And I mean, one other way we could word this is building advisory board membership shall be as provided, in the appropriate ordinance setting composition or something like that. So then it always kind of redirects somebody back to that one location rather than having it all listed in there. It's one way to kind of keep your bylaws current. Sometimes the idea is to not list everything if it already lives in another place.
All right, moving on to term of office. This didn't change either. Most of the stuff isn't changed from before. It just kind of expands a little bit on it. It gives a little bit more description. The new draft bylaws that we have here. Terms of office, each member is 4 years, appointed in August through September of that year, with an effective date of September that year. You can serve no more than 2 consecutive terms, and 1 year shall pass in between if you want a reappointment after the 2 years. Voting, it kind of expanded a little bit on voting. That really wasn't in your original bylaws here. At all meetings, the Building Advisory Board, each member attending shall be entitled to cast 1 vote. All members shall cast either an affirmative or negative vote unless he or she has a conflict of interest and they're abstaining. Voting by voice or roll call. Anyway, it goes on just to say how you vote there. It didn't really talk about that at all in the original bylaws. Ethics, Section 4. Lauren just kind of went over all that stuff about conflict of interest and things like that. Absences, that wasn't in your original laws either. It says you need to be, if you fall below 75% in a 12 months period, the secretary needs to notify the mayor, which could result in, dismissal or replacement. And also if you miss 4 consecutive meetings, that's also, a reason why might have to look to find a different member. So we want everybody to attend the meetings and participate.
Those absence numbers didn't just kind of come out of nowhere. They're actually out of that resolution that says all over city board and commissions operations. So technically, these apply right now. But as a new board member, it's normal to give somebody a copy of the bylaws, and they should be able to read those bylaws and kind of have a really good idea of how that board or commission functions. And so that's where those numbers came from. If for some reason this board wanted to change those numbers, they could within their own bylaws. They'd be contrary to that, but at least they're recognized in the bylaws. So if somebody doesn't make it to that resolution, they just look up this board's bylaws, they would know how this board operates.
So I got one question on that, I guess. So it's 75%, now we're at quarterly meetings, so does that mean one meeting and you're no longer on the board?
Well, no, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not on the board anymore. We'd like you to attend 75% of the meetings. And of course, individual circumstances always can apply.
Yeah.
So this isn't automatically you're booted if you happen to miss two or whatever. But the goal is to make it to 75% of the meetings.
Not a concern, but that's just one out of the 4 meetings a year.
Yeah, we can reword that. That's a good
Right.
point, at a quarterly rate. I think 3 consecutive meetings would probably make more sense in this board, based
Definitely.
on the amount of time you guys meet.
Right.
It says fall below 75. So if you only have 4 meetings and you miss one, you're not going to fall below 75.
You'll be right at it.
Right.
So if you missed your second one,
True.
yeah.
And our moving it to quarterly meetings doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to exactly stay that way. If there's new business that comes up or something that needs to be addressed, if it can't wait for 2 months or whatever like that, then we'll obviously definitely, can adjust that. But for the standard right now, we're going to leave it at that.
Well, and why these types of things are in bylaws is, maybe you've never experienced this, but it actually happens more often than you think, is you'll just have somebody kind of go missing. Like, you'll have somebody, 4, 5, 6 meetings, and you can call, you can send stuff, and you just never hear from them. And you kind of get to a point where the chair and the board has to have a mechanism in which to say, hey, look, we get it. Silent message, you don't want to be part of this anymore, but we really need this seat filled with somebody who wants to participate. So it gives them a way to kind of move things on.
This is also going on from what Lauren was talking about. It talks about vacancies. Any vacancy is resulting from resignation, removal, death, or a member serving as the chair shall cause the vice chair to automatically assume the position of chair, and a new vice chair shall be reelected. The next article is officers. Officers in the building advisory board shall be chair, vice chair, staff liaison, and clerk. Staff liaison is myself. Allison over here will be our clerk. And of course, you guys know who currently is the chair and vice chair of your board. Those are, of course, the chair and vice chair is elected annually, and that's what we're going to do in a little bit. Building official serve as staff liaison, and I'll appoint someone in my absence if I can't be here. And then it just kind of goes on how to appoint vacancies and things like that.
And 4 and 5, just really quick, because these are not in your current bylaws.
Right.
So any vacancy of office shall be filled by election for the remainder of a normal term. I have had boards where the chair and vice chair happen to work for the same company. It was a large company. They didn't, work in the same work group or anything, but that company folded, and those 2 individuals literally at the same time had to move from the area. And we had, boom, 2 vacancies like that. Rather than waiting that whole 1-year term, conducted an election for the remainder of that normal term. And then when September came around, did elections again. And I think number 5, on term limits, it's not because any one of you are not a great chair forever and ever and ever and ever, but it is important for kind of the health of a board that you do need to have some of that leadership changeover over time to make sure that the board stays cohesive. I've had boards where you don't have that kind of term limit, and you have a chair who's there for eons, and then, this is terrible, but they have a heart attack, and everybody kind of looks at each other like, well, now what do we do? I mean, they've had that same leadership for so long that the best way to keep that healthy is to pass that torch, and this kind of creates a system in which you do that.
Moving on to the next section, duties of the officers. This is also something new that wasn't in your original bylaws, but I kind of wanted you guys to hear this, especially before we elect new chairs. Section 1 is the chair shall preside at all meetings of the board and be eligible to vote on all matters coming to the board. He or she shall appoint all committees and is responsible for conducting all meetings in an orderly manner. The committees is important because if you hear an appeal to the tall grass and weeds code, something like that, those committees are only a 3-person panel. So the chair has to find 3 people on the board who will hear that appeal. And also, obviously, to code subcommittees and things like that, whenever we get into code review and things like that. So that's some of the responsibilities of the chair. The chair shall also sign all resolutions and other approved records, papers, and documents to the board. Section 2, the vice chair shall perform all the duties and assume all the responsibilities of the chair in his or her absence. Number 3, staff liaison. Staff liaison shall be responsible for issuing all necessary correspondence, notices, and agendas. He or she shall be responsible for compiling reports. Staff liaison is hereby designated as the official agent for the board in handling all federal, state, and local contracts and agreements. The staff liaison and his or her designated appointee shall present board actions and recommendations to the governing body, to the city commission. The staff shall sign a note approval of the minutes and the board and shall, when required by law, authenticate the signature of the chair. The clerk shall keep accurate records and proceedings of the board to include attendance records, minutes, packets, and current membership. So anyway, that's what we do on our side. Regular meetings, as you saw earlier, meeting at 3 p.m. in this room, and I kind of explained why we're moving to quarterly right now, but again, that can be subject to change as need arises. The agenda, these are all new items that weren't in your bylaws before. Staff liaison or other authorized person shall prepare an agenda of all matters to come before the board no later than Thursday preceding the next regular meeting. All requests for inclusion on the agenda must be known to the staff liaison by 5 p.m. on Wednesday preceding the next regular meeting. So if you guys have something that needs to be put on the agenda, please, let me know ahead of time, because it takes a bit of time to prepare staff reports and get the agenda prepared and things like that. So yeah, please feel free to give me a ring about any concerns or anything you think needs to get added to the agenda, and we can discuss. The addition of any new items on the agenda may be considered with the approval of the majority of the members present. Notification requirements of the Kansas Open Meetings Act may require action on these items occur at a future meeting following proper notification.
So an example of that is when you guys have your agenda set and one of you says, hey, I also want to talk about this. Mr. Chair, can we add this to the agenda? If you're anticipating that you want a decision made, yay or nay on something, it can't just get popped on the agenda like that, because part of the agenda is advertising that so that the public is aware that a decision is going to be made related to that item. You can pop on to the agenda the opportunity to discuss that as a board. That discussion then is recorded in the minutes. Those minutes then become part of the record. They're available at that next meeting. But taking action or decision, you can't just do that in a meeting. And that's why some of this requires how that gets on the agenda, what happens with the agenda, those things related to Open Meetings Act.
Special meetings, moving on to the section 3 there, Lauren talked about already too, a little bit previously in the previous presentation, but special meetings may be called by the chair and, in his or her absence, the vice chair, and upon request by any 3 members of the board. Written requests should be submitted to the board's clerk. When setting a special meeting date, time must be allowed for proper public notification. That goes back to that Open Meetings Act and notification that, we read off that statement on the first part of the agenda, that proper notification was put out. Annual meeting, which is what we're doing today. First regular meeting of the month of September each year. Didn't meet in September, so we're getting it done now. Shall be designed as the annual meeting, at which time the officers for the following 12 months shall be elected. Quorum, we kind of already covered that. Open meetings, we went over that already. 7 and 8 are holding places, anything we might need to add. And minutes available to the public. The clerk shall prepare and maintain permanent minutes to be kept available for public view and use. Committees, the chair shall appoint committees may be deemed necessary to carry on the work of the board. Subcommittee meetings, things like that, discussion of any items like that. Those minutes will be kept at those meetings as well. So everything is still a public record and open, but sometimes smaller groups are necessary to staff through certain things.
And really quick, Sean, just, I think this question's come up in the past too, is the availability of minutes. The city uses Q Content as our website provider, and you will probably get emails if you sign up for any of our boards and commissions through Q Notify, which is a product of Q Content. And you'll get a link that would take you to our packet. You can also get to it from the city's website. But if you're looking at that, just like in any kind of document, file name, you can see going back, you can get all of your board's minutes for, I don't know, it's at least 4, or at least 5, if not more than 5 years back. So all of your minutes are digitally available online. So if there's any question about the way the board's done something in the past, or if you have somebody come up to you and say, hey, what'd you guys do at that last meeting? I don't really know what happened. Of course, you can have them call staff and we'll get them minutes, but all of those minutes are available online. In addition, 2 years ago, these meetings all started being made available via video. So you can get them on YouTube, Salina Media Connections website, and the city's website.
All right. Got committees, annual report, that's done each year and presented to the city commission. Normally presented by January 31st, so usually end of January, or sometimes it's presented 1st of February, just on what the board's been up to for that year. Parliamentary authority, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. That's what we run our meetings by. Parliamentary procedure, Lauren kind of went over that already previously. And then the last part is amendments. These bylaws may be amended at any regular meeting of the board by a 2/3 vote of the members present and voting, provided that any proposed amendment has been submitted in writing at the previous regular meeting. So, does anybody have any questions over this? This, like I said before, this is in your packet that was sent out to you. If you want to read a little closer in your free time or whatever, but if you have any questions now on that, I'd be happy to answer them. But as of right now, it's just a discussion topic. We're not actually voting to pass these or anything at this time.
What I would say is the verbiage in here is very consistent with other boards that have more newer revised bylaws. And I think the thing is if you're going to have bylaws, you really need to have bylaws, because the ones from 2000 are not trying to be difficult, but they're kind of a few lines of information, but they're not really bylaws. I mean, the objective with bylaws is you set some standards and some rules on how you operate as a board. And certain things like how you vote, how you have elections, absences, things like that are pretty critical. And so if we've got these, we probably should put this stuff in it. They're also very helpful for other board members. If you have somebody you're recruiting, let's say we have a vacancy and somebody says, oh, I heard you're on Building Advisory Board. What's that board like? I mean, ideally, you give somebody a set of bylaws and say, here's a little bit about how our board operates. This is kind of the expectations, things like that. A good set of bylaws make that pretty clear to somebody, in addition to a few other things.
Okay, I think we're done with item 3.3.1. Unless you guys, again, sorry, if you guys had any questions or anything you want to discuss following that presentation.
Okay, item 3.3.2, annual business meeting and officer election. So proceed to officer election?
Well, I got a little staff report here that I'll go over, and then we can do that and move forward. September is generally the annual meeting of the Building Advisory Board and the time for selection of new officers, the membership of the BAB with full board being 11 members. Position of Realtor is open at this time. On August 24th, 2020, Mayor reappointed William McBride and Rick Walters to new 4-year terms starting August 31st, 2020. Mark Frazier served as the chair the past year. David Miller served as the vice chair. City's policy for citizen boards and commissions, attachment A, that's on there, state that the responsibilities of the chair include presiding at all meetings. I think I went over all this stuff in the other one, but appointing all committees, recognizing the board members and members of the public to speak, and to decide all questions of parliamentary procedure. So the chair shall also sign all resolutions and other approved records, papers, and documents on the board. The vice chair shall assume those responsibilities in the chair's absence. These jobs are important and have responsibilities. Members should consider this when making nominations for yourself or others for these positions. So you can nominate yourself or someone else when we get to that point. Following nominations, a roll call will be taken to effect to elect new officers. And Building Advisory Board action is to appoint nominees and elect a chair and vice chair to serve until September 2021. So with that, I will leave it to you guys to appoint. We can start with chair. And
So nominations for chair for next year are open. I nominate Mike McCall for chair.
I'll second.
Any more nominations for chair? Nominations are closed. Roll call vote, starting on the right.
Yay.
Aye.
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 Nominations are open for vice chair. Nominate yourself if you want to do it.
I nominate Ryan White.
I'll second.
Any more nominations? Nominations are closed. Roll call vote, starting on the right.
Aye.
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 Okay. Moving on to preliminary discussion items. None. Unfinished or other business?
Mr. Chair.
None.
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question under other unfinished business or other items. Two things, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of rebooting a little bit. Previously, your board clerk, we're introducing new people to help staff this board. So I just want to make sure that we've got everything set up for you guys. Not all boards want their packets printed. I just, ahead of time, do you want your board packets printed? I'm getting some head
I'll say
shaking.
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
okay. We will make sure you guys have a copy of your packets printed. You'll still get your digital ones. I think it's worth having a little mini discussion about frequency of meetings. Quarterly versus every other month versus monthly. Like I said, with COVID, we have pulled a lot of our boards back to quarterly, and those that meant even more frequently, like twice a month to every other month. What is your thought? Is quarterly enough? And then if we get more frequent, every other, or?
I would like to interject a little bit. We could have a meeting every month, like it said in the previous bylaws, but the meeting agendas would, we've had these before. We come in here and we have a meeting that lasts 15 minutes, and you guys are all busy, and I don't want to drag everybody in here for a 15-minute meeting. That's the reason why we kind of were recommending meeting quarterly instead of that. But if you guys have other ideas, I was just kind of giving our thought process behind it.
Well, right now, it's kind of set up quarterly as the official deal, but if staff has something that you need to have a meeting, you can call the meeting, right?
Yeah.
More than quarterly?
I mean, it would probably have to be on that second Tuesday, but yeah, we could do it. We could do it more than quarterly.
If you had a whole load of stuff and you didn't want to wait, you could do it. I
Yeah.
mean, otherwise, I think that's great, because
Yeah, I mean,
I don't like coming down here for 15 minutes either.
yeah, I'd prefer not to have a 15-minute meeting, but I'd prefer not to have a 4-hour meeting as well, so.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we
Kind of play by ear.
yeah, we can definitely adjust that, but I just wanted to leave it at quarterly, and then if, that way, every month you're not waiting on, are we gonna have it or not, are we gonna have it or not? You'll know it's gonna be no unless for, it'll be a big thing if I call and let you know that, yeah, we're gonna do this because we have A, B, and C, and previous meetings will probably lead up to that. If we have, our next quarterly meeting, we have, 8 things on the agenda, and this is gonna be kind of a heavy load coming forward, we can make those changes, but.
Yeah, and I would assume like a mowing appeal would be something that would call for a extra
it'd be
meeting in there.
it'd probably-
They can't
or
wait
if
4
nothing
months
else, a
to
special
just get a
meeting.
decision on their grass mowing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's what Mr. Miller's saying. If we have something that comes up that's like a quasi judicial matter, some type of hearing or something, we could call a special meeting for that.
I think once we get into code review again, then maybe we look at changing that, because that obviously, we usually had votes every month because we had a new section to work on, so.
Right, absolutely.
So one question I have, the current bylaws say they're monthly. Do we have to make a change to that? I mean, do we have to adopt the new bylaws before we go to quarterly, or does it really matter? I mean, if they are truly bylaws, then,
It should matter, yes. I mean, so at a minimum, if we go to quarterly, to be all in all, you should amend your bylaws to address that. And that's one of the things, because I saw it when we were going through here, that we've got them identified as every other month, and we're talking quarterly, so I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I think just from what you guys have been doing the last few months, we could take a look at quarterly, and we have other boards that are like that. Quarterly works, and then with the knowing that you may need a special meeting for those kind of more immediate issues.
Right. So as of right now, like for next month's meeting, if we don't have one, you'll get a notification that's sent out because these new
Yeah.
bylaws here are not adopted or anything.
exactly.
It's
And
just
that-
what
that's
draft.
that's the thing I wanted to point out is you'll have to send out cancellations for next month and the
Right.
following month
If we
If
don't
we
have
don't.
it. Yeah,
if we haven't officially changed them, so.
that's correct.
Technically, we don't have till the end of the year because your board schedule was minimized in a resolution that got passed earlier this year for reduced board and commission schedules. And I think
There
that's
you go.
part of talking about it now is starting in 2021, that resolution expires. And so making sure that you guys are on the schedule you want to be on.
Okay, next item, public forum. Do we have any interest in public comments, or seeing none? We'll move to adjournment. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I hear a second.
A second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.